I've spent 38 years serving the people of Providence, and in that time, I've learned something about America that still gives me hope. In this country, we built a system where a 73-year-old Vietnam veteran who spent his life delivering mail deserves the same justice as the wealthiest person in town. That's the promise we made to our seniors, to everyone who came before us and built this nation. But that promise only works if we defend it, even when it costs us everything. I need to tell you about this case. A woman walked into my courtroom and threatened me, told me her husband's police badge would protect her from consequences. She didn't know her husband was sitting in the back row, listening to every word, and what he did next became the most painful act of courage I've ever witnessed. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to do something. Comment below and tell me where you're watching this from. Are you in Phoenix, Atlanta, or Boston? I want to know because what happened in my courtroom that day needs to be heard in every American city. This is about whether we still believe our seniors deserve protection, whether we still believe in accountability. Now stay with me, because the ending you're expecting isn't what happened. Not even close. The case file sat in front of me that morning. Christine Morrison, age 42. When I read the charges, my hands tightened on the paper. Driving under the influence causing serious bodily injury. Leaving the scene. Reckless endangerment. 4 weeks earlier, she'd gotten drunk at a wine bar, climbed into her Mercedes SUV, and run a stop sign. She hit an elderly couple, Robert and Margaret. Robert is 73 years old, a decorated Vietnam veteran. He spent 30 years as a postal worker in Providence, serving this community every single day. Margaret is 71. They just left their grandson's 7th birthday party when Christine's Mercedes came out of nowhere. The impact threw their car into a telephone pole. Robert told me later, when I spoke with him, that he heard his ribs crack. He said the pain was worse than anything he'd experienced in Vietnam. Margaret's hip shattered on impact. She was unconscious for nearly an hour. Her husband screamed for help, and Christine Morrison sat in her Mercedes for 15 seconds. Witnesses told me she looked at the damage, looked at the elderly couple trapped in their car, heard Margaret's screams, then she drove away. Police found her 40 minutes later. Her Mercedes was hidden in her garage, front bumper destroyed, headlights shattered. They found her inside the house, pretending to be asleep. When officers told her she was under arrest, she asked them one question. She said to them, "Do you know who my husband is? Here's my question for you, and I want an honest answer in the comments. If you were in Christine's position, would you have stopped to help that elderly couple? Yes or no? Just type yes or no. Because understanding that choice is everything. When I reviewed the medical reports, Robert can't lift his grandchildren anymore. His collarbone never healed right. Margaret might never walk without a cane for the rest of her life. At 71 years old, her golden years are gone, replaced with pain and fear. Their medical bills exceeded $180,000. And Christine Morrison hadn't called them once to apologize. She walked into my courtroom that Monday morning wearing designer clothes, carrying a handbag that probably cost more than most people make in a month. Her attorney was Marcus Webb, one of the most expensive lawyers in Providence. But what struck me wasn't the money, it was her attitude. She looked bored, like this was an inconvenience interrupting her important schedule. Her attorney started speaking immediately. He told me his client was remorseful, that this was out of character, that she'd already suffered enough shame and stress. He said she was a devoted wife and mother, that one mistake shouldn't define her life. I let him finish. Then I asked Christine directly. I said to her, "Do you understand the severity of what you did?" She seemed annoyed that I'd interrupted. She told me, "It was an unfortunate incident. I'm very sorry it happened. I'm willing to pay whatever restitution is required to make things right." An unfortunate incident. Those were her exact words, like she'd dented someone's car in a parking lot, not like she'd nearly killed 2 elderly Americans and left them to die on the side of the road. That's when I knew this hearing was going to be different. Because when someone calls destroying 2 seniors' lives an unfortunate incident, they're about to learn something about American justice they should have learned long ago. I asked Christine a simple question. I said to her, "Have you contacted Robert and Margaret to apologize? Have you checked on their recovery?" Christine looked at her lawyer, then back at me. She told me no, she hadn't reached out. I asked her why not. After 4 weeks, why hadn't she called this elderly couple to see if they were okay? Her attorney jumped in quickly. He said to me, "Your Honor, I advised my client not to have any contact. It's standard legal strategy. Any communication could be used against her in court. Legal strategy. I've heard that phrase 1,000 times in my courtroom. But when you're talking about a 73-year-old veteran and his 71-year-old wife lying in hospital beds, legal strategy sounds like an excuse for having no conscience. I pulled out the victim impact statements. Robert wrote his in shaky handwriting. He told me about serving in Vietnam, coming home, spending 30 years delivering mail in all weather. He said he'd never asked for anything special, never expected special treatment. He just wanted to live out his retirement in peace with his wife. Now he can't pick up his grandchildren. His 7-year-old grandson cries when Grandpa can't lift him anymore. Margaret's statement was even harder to read. She wrote about the nightmares. She told me she's terrified to ride in cars now. At 71 years old, after a lifetime of independence, she's afraid to leave her house. Her hip required surgery. The doctors told her she might never walk normally again. I looked at Christine Morrison. I said to her, "These are real people. Real Americans who worked hard their entire lives. Your actions took away their peace, their health, their sense of safety. And you haven't even said you're sorry to them." Christine stood up suddenly. Her attorney tried to pull her back down, but she pulled away from him. She told me, "You don't understand the situation. You're making assumptions without knowing all the facts." I asked her what facts I was missing. I had the police report, the hospital records, the witness statements, the security footage. I said to her, "What am I missing?" That's when she said it. She looked directly at me and told me, "Perhaps you don't know who I am. I'm Christine Morrison. My husband is Captain David Morrison of the Providence Police Department. He's one of the highest-ranking officers in this city." Everyone understood what she was doing. She was threatening me. She was telling me that her husband's position in law enforcement would protect her from consequences. But she wasn't finished. She continued. She said to me, "When you start imposing harsh penalties, when you start treating me like some common criminal, you're going to create problems. Problems for you, problems for this court. Problems that could be avoided if we just handle this reasonably. I've been threatened before in my years on the bench, but never quite like this. Never by someone invoking a police captain's name to corrupt justice in a case involving injured seniors. This was something different. This was someone who believed that marrying into law enforcement gave her immunity from the law itself." Her attorney was frantically tugging at her sleeve, trying to get her to sit down and stop talking. But Christine kept going. She told me her husband has relationships throughout the legal system. She said he knows prosecutors, judges, police leadership. She told me it would be better for everyone if this matter was handled with what she called appropriate perspective. I asked her a simple question. I said, "Is Captain Morrison in the courtroom today?" Christine's confidence wavered slightly. She told me no, he wasn't here. She said he was working, that he's a very busy man with important responsibilities. I looked toward the back of my courtroom. I said, "Bailiff, is there anyone present connected to this case?" My bailiff scanned the courtroom. Then his expression changed. He nodded toward a man sitting in the back row, wearing civilian clothes. I asked the man to identify himself. He stood up and said to me, "I'm Captain David Morrison, Providence Police Department. I'm Christine Morrison's husband. Stay with me, because what's about to happen next is the most devastating moment of truth I've ever witnessed in my courtroom. This case is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming." Christine's face went completely white. Her husband had been sitting there the entire time. He'd heard every word she said, every threat, every attempt to use his name and his badge to escape justice. I asked Captain Morrison to approach the bench. He walked down the center aisle. Every person in that courtroom watched him. When he passed his wife, she reached out to grab his arm. She said to him, "David, please." He pulled away without looking at her. He didn't say a word. I could see pain in his eyes, but I could also see something else, resolve. I told him this was an unusual situation, but given that his wife had just invoked his name and position, I felt he should have an opportunity to speak. What Captain Morrison said next, I'll remember for the rest of my life. He told me he had no idea his wife was going to use his name. He said he'd explicitly told her not to do it. He said to me, "Your Honor, I'm not here to defend her. I'm here to support the justice system she's trying to manipulate." He told me they'd been married for 17 years. He said he's watched her become someone he doesn't recognize, someone who thinks rules don't apply to her because she married a man with a badge. He told me she's used his position shamelessly, repeatedly, despite his objections. Then he said something that made Christine actually shocked. He looked directly at me and told me, "Your Honor, when you're considering her sentence, I want you to know something. I don't support my wife's actions. I don't support her threats. And I want her to face the full consequences of her choices without any consideration for my position or rank." Then he continued. He said to me, "In fact, if you're wondering whether to impose the maximum penalty, I'm here to tell you to do it. My wife nearly killed 2 innocent people and left them to die. She deserves every consequence the law allows." Christine tried to speak, but her husband held up his hand. He told me he wasn't finished. He said he'd gone to visit Robert and Margaret in the hospital, not in any official capacity, just as a human being who was ashamed of what his wife had done. He told me he apologized to them. He said he looked Robert in the eye, a 73-year-old man with a Bronze Star from Vietnam, a man who spent his life serving others as a postal worker, and he apologized for being married to someone who could do this. Then Captain Morrison said something that shocked everyone in that courtroom. He looked at me and told me, "Your Honor, I'm filing for divorce. After 17 years of marriage, I can't stay married to someone who could do what she did and show no real remorse, someone who would threaten a judge, someone who would use my career, my reputation, my honor as a weapon to avoid accountability." Christine was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic. Her shield was gone. The protection she'd relied on her entire adult life had just publicly abandoned her. I thanked Captain Morrison for his testimony. I told him his integrity and courage were exactly what law enforcement should represent. I said to him, "Providence is lucky to have an officer with such moral clarity." He couldn't speak. He just nodded. He walked back up the aisle. As he passed his wife one more time, she reached for him desperately. He stopped, looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I don't know who you are anymore." Then he left my courtroom. I turned my attention back to Christine Morrison. Her expensive attorney suddenly looked much less confident. I told her that in 38 years on this bench, I'd seen many forms of arrogance, but using a police officer's rank to threaten a judge while that officer sits in the gallery might be the most shameless display I'd ever witnessed. Christine tried to apologize. She told me she didn't mean it the way it sounded. I stopped her. I said to her, "Your husband is right. You nearly killed 2 elderly people. You hid from consequences, and when finally forced to face justice, you tried to corrupt it." The sentence I delivered was the maximum the law allowed. For driving under the influence causing bodily injury, $5,000 and 1-year license suspension. For leaving the scene of an accident with injuries, an additional $2,500 fine and mandatory jail time, 60 days to be served on weekends over the next 6 months. For attempting to influence the court through threats and improper use of law enforcement affiliation, 300 hours of community service at Rhode Island Hospital's Trauma Center, specifically working with accident victims and their families. I also ordered Christine to attend mandatory alcohol counseling for 1 year. I required random alcohol testing. And most significantly, I ordered her to write personal letters of apology to Robert and Margaret and to make herself available to meet with them face to face if they chose to accept. The total was $7,500 in fines, 60 days in jail, 300 hours of service, 1 year without a license, and the public humiliation of having her corruption attempt become part of the court record. Her attorney tried to object. He called the sentence excessive. I told him, Christine Morrison had every advantage: wealth, education, a husband who served this community with honor. She could have been a force for good. Instead, she endangered lives, abandoned victims, and tried to corrupt justice. The sentence stands. Within hours, the story went viral across America. Police captain's wife threatens judge, husband supports maximum sentence. Captain Morrison became a symbol of integrity. Christine became a cautionary tale about privilege and accountability. 3 months later, something happened that I need to tell you about. Christine was working her community service at Rhode Island Hospital. She encountered Margaret, who was there for a physical therapy appointment. Margaret was walking with a cane, slowly, painfully. When Margaret saw Christine, she stopped. Christine froze. She'd written the apology letters as I'd ordered, but Robert and Margaret hadn't responded. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Then she spoke. She told Christine she'd read her letters. She told her she knew Christine was serving her sentence, attending AA meetings, working in the trauma center. Then Margaret said something that broke Christine completely. She told her, "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did. The pain is still too fresh. The fear is still too real. But I can see you're trying to change. And that's more than I expected." Christine could barely speak. She told Margaret she thinks about them every day, that she's so sorry, that she knows it's not enough, but she's trying to become someone who would never do this again. Margaret told her, "Your husband is a hero. What Captain Morrison did, standing up in court, supporting justice over his wife, that took more courage than most people ever show. I hope you realize what an incredible man you lost." Christine does realize it. Every single day. 6 months later, Christine completed her sentence. She's sober now. She's humble. She continued volunteering at the trauma center even after her required hours were finished. She's become someone patients actually trust, someone who can speak about consequences from personal experience. Captain Morrison's divorce is final. He's moved forward with his life. He never speaks publicly about Christine, but those who know him say he made the right choice. The Chens are recovering slowly. Robert's ribs have healed, though he still can't lift his grandchildren the way he used to. Margaret still uses a cane, but her doctors are optimistic. They're both in therapy, working through the trauma. Their grandson sees them regularly now. His nightmares are fading. And Robert and Margaret, she's selling her luxury clothes. She's moved into a modest apartment. She works a regular job in hospital administration. She rides the bus because she doesn't have a license and doesn't trust herself to drive yet. She's not the person who walked into my courtroom threatening me with her husband's badge. She's someone who's learning, painfully, what it means to be accountable. What happened in my courtroom that day wasn't just about one case. It was about the promise America makes to its seniors, to everyone who built this nation through hard work and sacrifice. People like Robert, who fought in Vietnam and delivered mail for 30 years. People like Margaret, who raised a family and contributed to her community. They deserve protection. They deserve justice. They deserve to live their golden years without fear. And that promise only works if we defend it, if we refuse to let wealth or connections or badges shield people from consequences. Captain David Morrison understood that. He chose the law over his wife. He chose what was right over what was comfortable. That's real courage. That's real integrity. This is what justice looks like in America. Not perfect, but fair. Not easy, but necessary. And always protecting those who deserve protection most. The seniors who built this country and deserve to live in peace. That's the promise I've tried to keep for 38 years. And that's the promise Captain Morrison kept when he chose justice over everything else. See you next case.